Tamra, I'm super appreciative. Every time that I just get to be in your presence or anybody to be able to speak about my journey, my story, and the grace of God, I'm super humbled, and I'm just so thankful.
Yeah, it's so cool because you were just in Kentucky, which I've got a lot of family in Kentucky and Indiana area. And you actually have some Kentucky stubble going on right
I
now,
do,
which isn't usually
yeah.
there. I was
Yeah.
teasing during the intro trailer because I'm like, oh my gosh, he's such a baby face. Right? You still have a baby face, but now there's some facial hair connected to it.
Yeah.
But it's home for me in a lot of ways. Even though I wasn't born and raised there, I go there all the time, and I want people to hear like the backstory of where it is that you kind of derived from, came from, and why it
hmm
is that you're such an advocate for mental health and breaking down those stigmas and showing up as an active duty military person to do this is like kind of vulnerable. And so we're going to get
hmm
into like all the depths of that too, but let's go back first.
Yeah, so I grew up in Macquarie County, Kentucky, and then after I moved from Macquarie County, Kentucky, I actually went to Eastern Kentucky University where I graduated, and then I commissioned as a United States Army soldier, and I then moved to Hawaii. After Hawaii, we were there for a couple of years. We went to Tennessee. Tennessee, we went to Missouri again. Missouri now to Colorado. So we've moved a few times, but
Yeah.
I come from a very small town. The population is very low. Most of the county officials, the cops, EMTs, everybody knows everybody. And the narrative being back in Kentucky is trying to switch that narrative of there's nothing that's good that comes out of that county. And I think my team and I wanted to showcase that, there is good that comes from small towns. It isn't just the negative. I think moving around as much as I have, there's pros and cons everywhere you go. So it was such a surreal experience for me to be able to go back and showcase that for my hometown.
Yeah, he was telling us like he was known, but not for what he's known for now in that town. It's like
Absolutely.
the pre Jesus line that we all
Mhm.
have in our life if we weren't raised in the church the way that I am honestly raising my children. So I'll be curious when they're whatever their future looks like, but I wonder if they'll have that pre and post that is so blatant in my life. Hopefully
Mhm.
not. Let's just hope not. That's the
Yeah,
prayer of a mama, right?
mhm,
that
for
that doesn't
sure.
happen. But now, Ryan, you're really in this space of social media content creation, and it was something that kind of fell into your lap. It wasn't really like
Mhm.
something you intended to take root the way that it did. And I'd love
Yeah.
to hear just like what that evolution was, and was your faith connected to it originally or no?
Yeah, so taking it back, I really kind of started social media publicly in 2020. I got back in from my deployment in late of November of 2020, and it wasn't faith based. Generally, I had steered away. I grew up in church, but it was in my opinion, I just was never connected because I had seen so much that went on in my home life and then around me that I just seen the persona of what God was doing, but it wasn't in my life. It was pretty much just kind of faking a smile. And that's why I'm so drawn to what I am today, is because I seen the good that happened on Sundays, but I also seen so much bad and so much trauma Monday through Saturday. But you
Yeah.
always put on that smile on Sunday like everything was okay. And I lived like that for the first 15 years of my life. After being physically, mentally, emotionally abused, my parents ended up divorcing at 15 years old, and then it kind of struck me after my deployment. I had been putting on this fake smile my whole entire life, and nobody really knew what we had went through and how poor we actually was. And after my deployment, I thought I could fake it even more. But then I was introduced to anxiety, depression, PTSD, and I got to my breaking point. And on my deployment, I had those conversations and realization that I may never make it back. And I was talking with God. And I was saying, if you allow me, if it's your will for me to come back, I will praise your name, no matter the circumstances, and I will live for you, and I'll be on that straight and narrow path. And it fell into my lap. I had never really had Facebook. I had never really been active on social media, and I was going through the deepest and darkest times after my deployment, struggling with addiction and really just finding out who I was. And then social media blew up, and I made that promise. If I can make it back alive, if God gets me back from this deployment, it's all His will and not my will. So showing at the very bottom of my platforms. When I had one follower, I was praising him. When I hit 1 million, I was praising him. And still to this day, it's always been him and nothing that I've done.
That's so good. It's interesting that we have those like negotiable conversations with our creator, right? And we're
Yeah.
like, we're really in those moments. I feel like sometimes the closest to him, because we're literally like, I know you can hear me. And if you can't hear me, you're about to prove me wrong. And then I know you weren't there. Yesterday on the show, I had someone who said this so profoundly, and I feel like it's so parallel to this. He said, either Jesus is the biggest liar that ever lived, or he wasn't. And you get to choose. And so there is truth or there is lies. There is no gray. And so you got to this place of recognizing that, man, there's no gray, that it is all by the grace of God. And so you show up in that. I want to know, when you were in that place, and I know that you still can be, because Lord knows, I'm raising my hand over here, that mental health is renewing of the mind daily, right? That's why he literally says daily, is you're going to run up against brick walls sometimes, or the brick walls coming into you, and you're trying to avoid it at all costs. How do you help people specifically in, active duty arenas? Because PTSD in that regard is really different than the PTSD that I've dealt with from a trauma perspective.
Right. It's always different approach with everybody that I encounter. But for me, and being so grounded in my faith, and me realizing, when I was going through that deployment and we started taking contact, and I seen really it could be life or death for me. That's where, it grounded me then, like, hey, only reason that I made it out of the location that I was in, it was because of God. And now looking back now, only reason I made it out as the childhood and certain situations back then, it was always him. I just never knew it. So that's kind of how I steer it. Is I love to give people my personal experience, how God has changed my life and how he's been there when I didn't even know he was there. Because there's a lot of conversations where I talk to non-believers and they're like, well, I've been through this and God wasn't there. And I'm like, well, it really, you're not going to want to hear it, but he's been there all along. You just don't know it. There's been plenty of times where when I was a younger kid, and facing some of the troubles and trials that I've been through, I was just like, if God was real, if God was here, he wouldn't have had me in those situations. God was with me every step of the way. And I truly believe that now. And using my faith as a tool it's just helped incredible, because now I have something that I grew up knowing, but I actually believe, and I'm grounded upon that now.
Yeah. It's interesting because you do hear that a lot in the heartaches and the heartbreaks of people, is like, there could possibly not be a God for so-and-so, like someone that you love to pass away, or for someone to be born stillborn, or like, the list could just go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And I found in my hardest moments that God was actually there shaping me to become who I am now and who he still intends for me to become. Like, it's just an element. It's a stepping stone. Now, when death gets involved in that, and I know you and many, many have lost loved ones and fellow soldiers in the midst of war, it's hard to put that understanding to a grandiose plan that we can't possibly understand, but also to know that, like, heartache and heartbreak is a result of sin. Whether that person was sinning or not, it's a part of the story that unfolds. And I think for mental health, it's hard because we don't often want to take ownership to the parts of mental health. We become more of the victim. How do you encourage people in that ownership path to be like, yeah, just like you said, the pre-Ryan in Kentucky took full ownership, and that's who I am and was, but it's not who I am now.